Design is often treated like a handoff, but what if it's the glue? Today's guest believes that design is what holds teams, departments, and strategies together. With over 20 years of experience as a user experience practitioner and founder of the consultancy Gauge, he's worked with some of the most innovative companies in the world to create human-centered, evidence-based strategies that are powered by data visualization, including folks like Adobe, Wells Fargo, the San Francisco Giants, go Giants, and he's spoken at Google, Stanford, HeavyBit, and People Nerds, to name a few. Along with his work at Gauge, he's now helping the next generation of designers and strategists turn insight into impact, teaching data visualization for the MBA in Design Strategy at the California College of the Arts. Today, I'm so delighted to be joined by your human in the loop,
Nick Cawthon.
Nick, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Tracy. It's good to talk to you. I'm happy to be here.
I want to start with this idea, something that struck me as I listened to some of the other podcasts you've recently been on and, dug around as one does, is this idea that you talked about the design being the glue. And I'm wondering if you can start with a bit of what you mean by that and maybe how did your own journey in design lead you to that idea?
Yeah, design being the glue. There are some movies that will smash cut you to the climax and then back you up into all the things that preceded it. I feel like that's where we're going, is that if we smash cut into an environment in which designers had this value of they were able to wield these tools and produce these artifacts that have suddenly gotten called into question, whereas anybody with a keyboard and a blinking cursor can create prompts that will generate UIs that makes me ask, why do I need you anymore, overpriced person wearing black? And that notion of glue, of where does the designer's value now lie? If our tools and our artifacts have been called into question, what do we bring into a user-centric design and development product process? And I think that those people skills of facilitation, of understanding of requirements, of human emotion, to extract definition and direction for products are going to become all the more important as our velocity increases, ability to execute and implement at a much faster rate than we ever thought before. Mm-hmm. But first, how did we get here? I was my son's age, and it's funny, Tracy, when you have these moments in your life that maybe only last 10 or 15 minutes, but are very pivotal in how you define yourself and your career and what you do. And I remember I was in an aftercare program where the den mom handed us paper and pens to probably keep us quiet. And we all sat at the table, myself and my little buddies, and drew for however long it was. I mean, given my son's attention span, it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes or so. And I remember coming out of that, looking at my paper and looking at my friends and thinking, wow, I really actually cared about this. Like I wanted to make sure it was a drawing of a dogfight between World War II airplanes. And I remember really feeling the emotional investment and pleased with the result and looked around at everybody's and wow, I was the only one that actually cared. And it was, a warning or an inkling that, visual arts might be something that you want to do. And when nobody tells you what you want to do, you've got to figure that yourself. And then, continuing on, lucky enough to have nurturing parents who would, send me to the summer camps for visual arts and encourage me to sort of balance myself in those kinds of studies. And that's where it started from, was an interpretation of that which was visual, which was eventually evolving into design. And then coming back from university into the San Francisco Bay Area around 2000, and realizing that my portfolio wasn't very good compared to what I was seeing of those around me, and two, that there was this divergence between were you a designer that was doing InDesign and PageMaker and magazines and layouts, or were you a designer that was macromedia director, CD-ROMs, clickable things, because there was this wave called the internet that was rising up and offering opportunities and extensions of traditional design skills that weren't there a few years beforehand. So that takes you back quite a ways. And now we are at where we are today, when there's another upheaval happening and there's another interpretation of what those skills might be. And that is causing, I think, a lot of self-examination, and in some cases anxiety, in other cases curiosity amongst our community.
I'd love to build on that idea of where we are now. And before we get further into that, I love to ask the question. So it's building thinkers. I'd love to ask at this point now, how do you see yourself in terms of what you build? If somebody said, what is it, Nick, that you build? What would you say?
Consensus. You build consensus, which is an ethereal way of saying if you hold on to the thing, you can never become thinglessness. Which was a quote I heard from a professor in Canada, is that we need to embrace the thinglessness of what we do, because the more you hold on to it as that craft, the more vulnerable you can be when it gets called into question. So if we can build a consensus through, again, conversations, facilitation, illustration of, hey, this is what we heard and this is what we think and might be where we go, that can help mitigate risks, and that can help bring people together. Again, that silo approach, especially with large enterprise organization, of handoffs, where, okay, design is done, clap my hands twice, give it to you, Tracy, the developer, good luck to you. And Tracy will look at this saying, I could have done this in 10 seconds. Like, yeah, I don't see where you're coming from and what's being built into this. A democratization of how you arrived at consensus, of what inputs you had and what conversations and references you might have made, I think will go a long way in an environment that, again, is challenging the notions of who's doing what.
Yeah, in this idea of thinglessness. So I think a lot about learning agility and the idea of being a multi-potentialite. And I see some overlap there in this agile nature of being able to shift and move and continue to learn and relearn and unlearn. How do you see that piece of it, maybe the learning side in particular, as so vital for the moment in time? I mean, you're talking about seeing the original, boom of the internet and working through that with companies to what you're seeing now. What might you say to people that are coming from a place of fear a little bit of the velocity of change, to your point? Any thoughts around that?
I've been lucky enough to encounter people in my career. As a consultant, you meet a lot of people and you work with a lot of teams and see different perceptions on the workplace. And I've been lucky enough to see people who had fear or mistrust, where they didn't want to use the cloud. They felt more comfortable when that icon was on their desktop and they knew it was on a hard drive that they could hold in their hand. And to be fair, that the early days of the cloud, files did get lost, and you moved something or renamed it and didn't know where it went, and then everything's horrible. And maybe to put a file on a messy desktop gives a sense of comfort. But life has moved on, and instead of using Microsoft Office like the first wave of digital transformation told us to do when we replaced pen and paper, things like SaaS platforms have replaced spreadsheets for time tracking or project management. And we have this fear of, I just figured out how to use this thing. I'm not going to go back to the anxiety that comes with being confused, or I don't trust this technology because I don't want to disrupt what I already know. And I think your notion of fear and our ability to know or recognize oneself, to say, I fear this. I'll be honest with you. I fear raising money. I fear talking to people and asking them to put a bet on me. And there's no reason I should fear that. I should be confident in what I do and the strategy and the ideas that I have. And I need to start to strengthen those muscles, especially in this time and day, and especially in this town. There's no better place to do it and see where it goes. So, we all have our own fears.
Let's go to almost the systems level for a minute and think about the different environments that you've been in. And as you've worked with different companies, different organizations, are there certain patterns that you see showing up and over again, whether it's siloed organizations and talking about how the design glue, as you've talked about, goes through, or a misunderstanding of what design does, anything around that where you have seen a theme across the work?
I'll tell you a story from my most recent engagement, and I'm sure it's typical of many enterprise organizations. I had been brought in a second time, several repeat clients, but this one was 18 months after the last engagement, and it was to do an internal application. And at the end of the first time through, we handed off these Figma documents, workflows and prototypes, and we said, good luck, clapped our hands twice, and say, here, development team, here you go. This meets every need. And it was an abject failure. When we came back in 18 months later, what had been built was, it looked not just visually wrong, but from a fundamental standpoint, we really missed the mark with our understanding of the development team's ability, priority, resources, whatever. And so the second time through, we came to iterate this product a second pass. And I said, we're not making the same mistake twice, because the environment in which we're working in, A, we only have 6 months to do it. And B, if we hand off Figma files again, we're just repeating our mistakes. And so in surveying the landscape, it was a siloed design. Ascent has a review process in which you submit components to, they review it, then send it back for review, and then they review it, and then it goes in a queue, then it gets handed off to engineering, and then engineering implements it, and then maybe you can use it in your application design. And that's the way it is. It's systems control. And because pattern libraries are important building blocks for enterprise design teams to maintain and understand, that is a pattern that designers have spent the last 10 years building. Now, thank you, generative tools. You've taken down all those patterns and you've trained your language models and your visualization models to use those patterns and give us UI at the snap of a finger. But there are still those that are toiling in the design mines, crafting one pixel at a time. So a spoiler on that story is that because we came in as an outside consultant, and because we worked for the product team, not the design team, as designers, we didn't abide by that flow. And myself and another designer, we rejected Figma and said, we're not going to give you what, in my opinion, is a very sort of poor fidelity prototype in which Figma produces. Instead, because we have email addresses, we're going to go and get the code components library that the development team's already built and use that to train our model. And then we're going to set guardrails on the generative tools that we use to create our prototypes. And then that way, the gap between design and development is going to be as small as we can make it, with all the logic conditions, error mapping, and variables that go into that kind of deliverable. And so, to answer your question directly, those types of patterns of siloed design versus development, or maybe the developers get to use the AI tools and the designers get to use them for a hackathon, but never again. And there's not that knowledge share that's going on with, hey, here's how we can make your job better, and here's where it might be more trouble than it's worth.
Okay, that takes me to two sides of a question. So maybe we can hold that story in our mind as kind of an anchor story for the themes that you're bringing up there. I want to know how that makes you think about, at this current moment, and maybe the future you see ahead in the near term for right now. What is the role then of the human in the loop? And then I want to also ask, what do you how might AI help us solve some of the challenges as well? Like, where are the humans, where are the AI in your idea of being the human in the loop?
Yeah, we're the human. It's the emotion of understanding areas of confusion and delight and frustration and joy and all of the unique aspects that make us different from the machines. Is that maybe that artifact, and we've covered this already, was like if that design artifact gets called into question, what we can start to point out is, hey, service design thinking, journey mapping, customer experience, of like, they're coming into this and expecting that, and wouldn't it be great if we showed them something that confirmed an emotion that they have had? So I think that's the human in the loop. You can use that term in many different ways of transparency and avoiding hallucinations and verification, those kinds of things. from a designer standpoint, I think it's with regards to what are we making our user feel. We've, again, to go back to the differences between UI and UX, we've created these pattern libraries and these design systems that are now becoming increasingly commoditized. It started with the Googles and the Apples of the world putting their design systems out for anybody to use. If you want to create an app here, the button should go like that. Early days of the web, if you were an early shopper of Amazon, they used to have 3 tabs where for every department within their everything store, they had a tab, to the point where there were 25 to 30 tabs that you were just trying to click. This was before the standardization of what a information architect should look, what that architecture should look like on an e-commerce site. I bring that point up because we've commoditized and standardized user interfaces quite well. But it's only been in the past 10 or 15 years that this concept of user experience and applied research and qualitative interviews and understanding of that type of thinking has really come into the threshold as an adjacent component to capital D design. And I think that keeps us relevant. And the more we can go up the food chain of being strategic, being a builder thinker, being a strategist, the more potent we can be. I think the opposite's true. The closer we can get to the code base and the components of what it is that we're using these assistive tools to generate, the more valuable we can be. But don't stand in the middle. Make sure you can go in one direction or the other.
Yeah, I've heard you use the metaphor of the snake eating its own tail when in regards to the technology, and now that has given me a schema to plant the idea that you just set. Like you kind of don't want to be in the middle, although I guess then you wouldn't get eaten by the snake. So anyway, it falls apart there.
That's the whole. Yeah, there's the whole. Yeah.
So when we think about our kids, and we think about kids in general, what do you hope that they are learning right now? How are you thinking about the way in which they're learning and growing? And then I'd love to go into, I know you've also been teaching at the university level and then in the workplace, but let's start with kids.
So my eldest got asked by a neighbor to conduct a Dungeons and Dragons session. He's 13. It's his first quote job. And the kids are anywhere from 6 to 11. There's 5 of them. And, the anxiety with somebody wants to pay me money to do something, and I got to scramble and get my thoughts together to conduct 5 one-hour sessions where you, spoiler alert, kill the dragon. I complimented last night after his first session. I said, you just got paid to think. You didn't get paid to sell lemonade. You got paid to come up with something creative, to conduct a session and think and talk and be. And that skill is going to be invaluable for you, to acknowledge that there's value there and that there are skills there, and that's something that you can develop for a career. Related, the engineering manager for the company that I mentioned in the story earlier has since moved on to bigger and better pastures, also said that in the management of her team was a Dungeons and Dragons game where every sprint, every cycle was about a metaphorical dragon and having to get different characters and roles together to go off and challenge that dragon. And so I love that there's this learning ability needed to have intellectual property up there, and that kind of thought of, I'm not just going to be the best coder in the world, or I'm not going to be the fastest at this, but I have this ability to think and to do. So builder thinker, that type of mantra. And I know that's hyperbole, and we're talking about a 13-year-old versus a 22-year-old that might be coming into the career. But I think another aspect of my development that was extremely helpful was to fail fast. And I don't mean that with the companies and the starting, although that may be coming up soon. It'll be fail spectacularly. But being in the San Francisco Bay Area, you've got startups that are succeeding and failing every day. And if you want to level up your skills and see what works and what doesn't, you make those experiments early on in your career and your development, because you will be in small teams exposed to that kind of collaborative environment and see and turn over and churn. It will be stressful and chaotic and wonderful and like all of the things about being in your 20s, trying to get some momentum to it. But I think that time spent is really going to be valuable in this period, which we're all learning. Nobody knows
Right.
how this is all going to work. So why not jump in and go shoulder to shoulder with people who are trying to figure it out alongside of you and get paid at the same time?
Yeah, and when you think about maybe adults now in the workforce that are partway through their career, is there anything you'd add there if they maybe feel like they don't have as much of that space to
Yeah.
try and fail? Although I might argue that they can in there. So maybe it's the same, but or is there something different?
No, it depends on your scenario. I think both you and I come from a very lucky standpoint where we have the breath to be able to think and
Mhm.
talk about this. There have been times in my career and in my profession where I haven't had the ability to think and question and maybe pivot. There's also a notion of when do you allow yourself to be curious? When do you acknowledge that there is something happening and that it's around me and I need to take grasp of this? I don't know if that's a teachable skill. I think that's just inherent to who you are. You always want to challenge yourself. For me, it comes from a place of anxiety of not feeling like I'm good enough or smart enough or adept enough, and like I need to always try to affirm that through tinkering and through hyperactivity. And then maybe others it motivates in a different fashion. But these skills are assistive. They've gotten less and less technical despite the confusion it may seem on the surface. And so you can give yourselves those moments of joy and wonder and accomplishment very easily. And I've come full circle. Here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we see these hype cycles come across the bow every 6 to 12 months because people are trying to raise money. And they're trying to use buzzwords. And if you drive to San Francisco Airport, you'll see these billboards, and it's all an echo chamber of groupthink. And right now, it's AI. But 12 months ago, it was blockchain, and 12 months before that, it was Web 2.0. And the point I'm trying to make is that to have that curiosity and patience to sit through the first couple episodes of a technology and decide it's like a TV show, like 3 episodes. I'm out. But this one, I think, is a good series to follow in terms of generative technology and how it can change your workflow.
I want to build further into this when you think about success. I heard you mention kind of an evolving definition of success as something that changes over time. Can you speak more to that idea? We have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen, a lot of folks that maybe have a side hustle and are figuring out what does it mean to, to go all in. It sounds like you've done some of that. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a constant point of self-examination of what success is defined as, and different people are at different stages of their career. Early on, it was I want the big names. I want to work for the big names. I can put those on my portfolio. Like I don't want to do these. Podunk is a word that I've used on previous podcasts that has caused pausing and reflection because the hosts were not well versed in American, and these clients that may not have the reputation that I feel like I deserved, and so early on, to be able to claim these clients was really sort of something that I would consider a measure of success. And then it was I was fortunate to find a life partner who has stuck with her career for now almost 30 years. And with that has been able to carve out the space that she needs to go on vacation and take time for herself. And meanwhile, is thrown into this tech cycle of we got 6 months of money left. Like there's no vacation. You just got to go all in all the time. And that was very, as a child of academics, that was very jarring for me because, I feel summer creeping in and I'm tired of this town again. You were used to leaving and going off and resetting and coming back in the fall and then having another cycle. And so the definition of success was boundaries, where I need to be able to establish boundaries between when I'm focusing, when I'm working, and when I'm not. Because that to be, constantly stimulated by demands and bosses and schedules was something that I needed to be able to control. And that pushed me more into being a consultancy, being an entrepreneur, being my own boss, to say, you're making the call of what that vacation schedule looks like. because if you hand it to somebody else, their definition of what your responsibilities are may be completely different. So and now coming into success, it's working on awesome projects. And going back to the art school student in me, who, when you get a creative brief, it doesn't tell you how to do it. It doesn't say you got to use these colors and these tools. It just says, here's what the outcome should be. Get there any way you can. And I consider that a huge measure of success. I'm very, very lucky to be able to fund my learning through paid projects where I get to explore new technologies and approaches and methods of which, if I were in a traditional role, I'd be following a different track. And so those are three sort of examples of success at various points in my career. What about you, Tracy? I want to hear about what success means to Tracy Clark.
Well, I love that. I mean, the boundaries one got me because one of the kind of focus words for this year for me as an entrepreneur was margin. And I resonate with a lot of what you're saying about the kind of constant, maybe anxiety underneath to do the next thing, to do the next project, to keep going, and connections to kind of never being good enough. I know that that's the root for me, and I have a lot of self-awareness around that, and have thought about reframing that as, if not me, then who, in certain rooms I'm in certain environments. So I think for me now, success is making an impact, and within my family space, supporting my boys to grow up with a life of maximum optionality. I want them to have the maximum choice in what they pursue and where they head. And I think about that in a lot of the work that I do too, for the students and some of the work that's at the university level or the clients at the organizational level. I think about them in the same way, if that makes sense. I want them to flourish. And it sounds super idealistic, but I think in a lot of the space that I'm in that's around activating human potential, it's like, to what end? Well, I want them to flourish. I want them to have the maximum amount of choice. I want to pursue equity. And so in different spaces that I'm in, to me, that looks like impact. If the project's impactful, I love the big names as well, but I am also okay if nobody ever knows that I did this and I'm a little footnote on an 80-page document and it made an impact for other people.
That ability to see laterally of like, here's where you're on, but if you want to take a left or a right, that from both a parenting as well as a mentoring perspective, I think that's a great way of looking at it. Is showing option.
I think it aligns to what you were just saying about the creative brief. They don't care how you get there, but just get to this end, and there's all these different avenues. And I think about that too in terms of that's why I love this podcast. Everybody's different lived experience and the projects they worked on and their family structure and the things that brought them to the work that they're doing, I think is really powerful. And one of the questions I really like to ask along this line is, if only people knew when it comes to design or it comes to this moment in time with AI or success, wherever you want to go.
Yeah, if only people knew where the finish line is. I want to find myself doing something that I like to do and doing something that challenges me and people that I enjoy collaborating with, because I don't know where that finish line will be. And if I can just keep doing it as long as I do it, then I don't really care where it is, because it's what I would do anyways. And so I think about the gold watch era of our parents' day, where they worked for one company their entire career, and they knew that at 62 and a half they'd be done, or 30 years of service or whatever it might be, and there'd be a formal retirement ceremony just like there was for my father, and they say thank you very much and off you go. Like, I've eschewed all of that because I rejected institutions. I thought like, I can make this up myself. And what you heard in a previous conversation was this notion of, well, you need to be your own institution, because that's the framework in which you saw success happening in. And even though you rejected other people's institution, you still hold on to a notion of success of building your own, when that's not necessarily true anymore. Now, the notion of success is when you can control slow or fast, or stop or go, or yes or no. And so, I'm dating myself a little bit, where as I look down the road 10 or 15 years, I think, how long am I going to do this for, and who am I going to do it for, and what am I going to do? And I'm trying to envision this ceremony where I get the watch and I get the applause and they say, thank you very much. And that may not necessarily be there for me or for any of us as entrepreneurs, as independents, because we're going to decide how these skills manifest and where we find our way. So that's in the back of my mind, is that it may not be so clear of now you're done and now it's okay.
Yeah, perhaps we never arrive, and it is
Yeah.
a bit more about the presence of the doing and the being in
Mm-hmm.
this moment. Another area of self-awareness I work on often, because I lean towards the human doer instead of human being, because it's so easy, of course, to have 10 million tabs open in our mind. And there is this pressure in entrepreneurship, of course, you do have to keep going in a certain sense, and you do have to hustle in a certain sense. And there's not, all of that isn't, binary as negative or positive. But how has that thinking evolved for you when you're talking about, where the end game might be and in the day to day? How have you been thinking about those boundaries maybe recently in the work that you're doing? It sounded like you may be kicking something up soon. And so how you might be thinking about that.
I have a conversation with those who have chosen the enterprise path, and they tend, this is bucketing people, and apologies for the stereotype, but it tends to be when you go down an enterprise route once that you find a hard time doing anything but. It has to be a very dramatic cancellation of, I'm not going to work for a large company anymore, because there's a stability there and a familiarity and the love of the logo on the side of the building. And I often have conversations with them about how it is we do what we do on both sides.
Yeah.
And I tell them, I have total control. If I want to spend my days as a podcast guest because I feel that that's going to be beneficial to my business, there's nobody to tell me that, no, that's probably not the best business model for somebody like yourself. But anxiety of, how am I going to make this up? I don't know where the next vine is coming from as I swing through the jungle. But it just, yeah, you're just like, I don't know where I'm going, nor where that next windfall or paycheck is coming from. And the opposite is, those who are at enterprise companies often sacrifice control, because now their hands are in somebody else, and that their job is at the whim of a board member or somebody who decides to lay off 9,000 employees because the threat of an existential technology is going to make us all obsolete. They lose control of their schedule and their calendar and their ability to say no. They spend, at our level, a lot of time doing human resources stuff rather than the actual work itself. And I always want to be have my finger in the technology, have my finger in the craft, in the product. So those kinds of notions of sort of boundaries and success and control are something I constantly deal with. You talked about human being versus human doing. How do you teach your kids about flow state, Tracy?
We talk about the idea of challenge and what's happening in your brain when you're under like productive struggle, and how productive struggle is connected to flow. And that without that challenge piece, it's like flow isn't just like sitting in like an inner tube in the lazy river or something, but that it's when you're sitting down so engrossed in something that you lose track of time. This is how I feel a lot of times in the type of design work that I end up in learning experience design. If I'm really in there and, putting those pieces together, I look up and it's like 3 hours later. And I love those moments. And so with my boys, that's how I talk to them about it, is trying to help them. They're still in a bit of the state, especially my younger one, of being frustrated when it's hard. And I try to be like, hi, neuroscience mom here. Like Professor Tracy is coming in with this. So I don't know. I probably have other methods I need to consider for that. What about you? How do you teach your boys?
It's been a great week on flow state. I don't know if it's just we're after vacation or after break, but both of them have been really calm. And one of them has started to come home after camp and then create these little models in Tinkercad. And then after dinner, it's like, Dad, can you print this out for me? And I can paint it and do things like that. And unprompted, this is my wildest dream, is that these kids want to come home and create. We have this sort of notion of creation versus consumption in our household. It's an anti-device mantra of like, if you want a device to create things, whether it be music or design or what words, I don't care, conversations, relationships, I don't care what it is, you just can't use it for consumption because this goes back to the thinking and the critical thinking skills and the sort of performance of it, is that you've got to be able to find yourself in a flow state of creation where time passes like that. And I love your notion of to acknowledge when time passes at different speeds. And that if you're working, and I mentioned the boy drawing, it could have been 20 minutes, but I remember coming out of that time warp and being like, oh, what just happened? I dove into that so deeply that I didn't think about anything else. And now I came out of it and I had this epiphany some odd years later that this was something that I enjoyed. And so, yeah, flow state is still, I think, again, my older son has a similar composition of a very high revving motor. And so exercise to balance body and mind is important. And the other has an ability to really, the tactical abilities and the fine motor skills and the concentration skills are unlike my skill set. But the hyper focus versus hyperactive are two things we balance quite a bit. So I know I didn't answer your question directly. I just sort of gave you some painting around it. But creation versus consumption is something that we talk a lot about here.
Yeah, I think about that part a lot too. And being on the right side of the compound interest of creation. I think about it that way and all the time that is spent when it's in consumption mode. And I understand the algorithms are trying to suck me in that way. And so I want to flip that and be making and be a part of the other side of the algorithm. Like,
yeah.
To hopefully make an impact, to hopefully share something that's worthwhile. To this podcast is also my own forced creativity to make myself publish something, post something, think about something. With each episode, I create a blueprint for thought that's some sort of thinking protocol that's inspired by our conversation, of something to kind of like a thinking worksheet. If you want to explore further, sometimes they're like journal entries or sometimes they're visualizations and just things people can consider to help them put the ideas that we've been talking about into action or reflect further on. And so
it's cheaper than therapy.
Yeah, exactly. Nick, will you tell us about Gauge and tell us about what you're doing there and anything else you want to kind of share with the audience about your work and, what kind of clients you're taking right now? Any of that? This is your pitch opportunity.
It's my pitch opportunity. Gauge has been, 20 years of bouncing in and out of jobs and then finding that there's freelancing opportunities or contracting opportunities. And then as you become more mature, you call it consulting. And I've never, up until 10 years ago, formalized that to say, oh, this is a consultancy and this is what we do. And this is the kind of work that we go outbound for, but this is the kind of work that comes inbound for. And we can sort of fit into these areas. And it's been in the practitioner space for a good deal of time. But lately, what I see as, again, the challenging of the design industry and my work being a professor is that there's going to be a training component as well. And so I think it starts with an assessment survey of what does your organization integrate into your design and UX teams? Where are generative tools being used? What are some of the hesitancies and challenges with a team trying to assist a workflow so it's not just using the same skills as you were before? And so that's been, you mentioned sort of education design. That's been my focus over the last couple of months is a survey to understand not only the industry, but also the participant, and then the curriculum that will result from that to say, okay, here's where we need to upskill our workflows, our understanding of how design and development can play better together. And if you want to take that survey, go to retrain with the letters AI in the middle of retrain .gauge.io. It'll be a short 10-minute. All results are anonymous, and you'll receive, like, here's where you're falling. Companies of this size in this industry are at this level of maturity, and you are above or below that. So that will be coming out. And then you can always find me on LinkedIn. Tracy and I are BFFs, and I'd love to hear from you there.
I'm going to continue thinking about the way you've described design and this idea of it being the glue. I'm thinking a lot around that and design, like the capital D versus lowercase d that you talked about a little bit.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
also like what it looks like, redefining our vision for success over time. I think especially as entrepreneurs, that really resonated with me too. And so I'm really excited for our listeners to hear this episode, and I'm so excited to be connected with you, Nick, and look forward to staying connected.
Yeah, great. Have an enjoyable rest of your week, and I'll talk to you soon.
If you want to keep reflecting on this episode, subscribe to the Building Thinkers newsletter, where I share a blueprint for thought to help you turn insight into action. And if this conversation resonated with you, share it with someone else who you think might enjoy it, or leave a quick rating or review. That helps more thinkers find their way here. And in the meantime, let's continue to build thinkers.